And like, to me, that is the definition of finding your family. That is that you care, you're investing as much into the relationship as I am. Welcome to another episode of The Captioned Life, a podcast about comics and pop culture on life and society. From deep in the heart of Texas, my name is Kevin, and I am joined by my good friends.
I'm James from Kentucky.
And I'm Sean from Indiana.
So this is episode 9 of our podcast. We've been doing it for a couple of months, and a couple of things that we've touched on in previous episodes, we've decided, hey man, we really want to circle back and talk about that. One of those things we mentioned in our very first episode when we discussed the Avengers Endgame movie, and that was how these superheroes came together and they found people who were similar to them in that these were other people that understood what being a hero was and understood that responsibility. And it got me thinking about that being a very common trope, finding the need for finding people that fit your need for family and friendship. The desire to find a place to belong or to fit in is a fairly common trope in comics, especially those in teams, and we all love superhero team comics. And it was featured in another comic book adaptation that I recently watched with my family, and that was Shazam, which if you haven't seen Shazam, I highly recommend it. I don't want to spoil too much of it, but family and adopted family plays a very prominent role. But this all got me thinking about how fairly common it is, and I wanted to jump in and start talking with you guys about your favorite examples. So we can kind of freestyle about this, or we can jump into any number of things. What are you guys' thoughts on the subject?
Have you all read House of X and Powers of 10 yet? The new Jonathan Hickman X-Men?
Not yet.
No, I haven't either.
Yeah, I was going to read it once it comes back on paperback.
Okay. I won't spoil too much of it, but it definitely takes this idea of family that Professor X and Magneto's always kind of had about wanting to bring mutants together as a family. But it really magnifies that, where it goes from wanting to create a family and take that family and create a country out of it. And it's truly just a phenomenal way to do it. It kind of takes that trope and kind of magnifies it and takes it to the next level. Yeah,
so I guess the X-Men, exposure to the X-Men was probably my earliest foray into comics, and not necessarily comics, but the X-Men animated television series from the early 90s. And if you look this particular trope up on the internet, which you can, and there's some great sources that kind of chronicle this, but in film and television, especially the X-Men have a lot of, there's a lot of documented examples of this. And it kind of is, they weren't the first superhero family. I think that designation belongs to the Fantastic Four. But the X-Men are definitely a group of people that with similar interests, with similar identity, that found a place to belong within a different group.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I agree with you, Kevin. Same here. X-Men was one of the first comic book series that got me into reading comics, and my uncle is actually the one that introduced me to it, and that's one of my fondest memories of childhood is diving into the X-Men comics, especially the first generation of X-Men with the original class. And it's a recurring theme in those comics, and even later on, that a common reason why they all became X-Men and came to the Xavier Institute was because they, in some form or fashion, was either abandoned or neglected from their family, either because their parents were scared, and it's not like they didn't want to be, that child's parent or anything like that, or that mutant's parent. They just either were scared for themselves because something happened to them and they were fearful of their lives, maybe because they were, anti-mutant and they couldn't believe that their child was mutant, like, they had a control over that or something like that, like they chose to be mutant one day.
Right.
and and there's just like, how dare you, right? And so it's one of those things where they have that common experience of being rejected in some level. And again, it may have been because their parents were very neglectful. It may have been that their parents was just fearful. And so it's, one way or another, that's why they came to Xavier Institute. So they had that shared experience, and that's what brought them together. And they were able to choose their family in that sense, where their bond and being mutants and their experiences and being able to go through the struggle together allowed them to grow as a person and as people too, right?
So I'm glad that you mentioned it, because it wasn't something that I had thought about when I was preparing notes for the show, but you had talked about all the different reasons that they come to the Xavier Institute. And I feel like that's a microcosm of what life is really like, because, and James can speak on this too, because he's at a school every day, but isn't that the first place where we find our second family is like with the kids that share an interest with us at school?
Yeah, that's a big one there. That's really that first place when you get to kind of choose your own family. And that's one of those things that I think all kids kind of take a great joy in doing once they kind of find their true friends and that kind of place where they kind of belong, and they can kind of form their family around that. And it's just really, truly a neat thing to watch and a neat thing to experience in doing that.
I remember being in the 5th grade, not long after the X-Men cartoons came out, and bonding with other kids over comics and the X-Men. But like one of the things that sticks out in my mind, and I still have a huge collection of them, is like the Wolverine trading cards. It was like a whole set of trading cards that told like Wolverine's history. And I mean, that was like 1992, and it was kind of at the height of X-Men popularity. They had just launched the second book, and it was the most popular book out there. But like I remember like the way that I learned about Wolverine's character and his story was trading these cards with other kids on the playground of my school.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, it was, I mean, I still remember, like, I don't have those cards specifically, but like now that I'm thinking about it, I want to get on eBay and look them up so that I can find them. But then also it just goes to show that, okay, so that was 1992. That was, man, I'm old. That was that 27 years ago?
Yeah.
Yeah. I was 10 years old in the 5th grade. This was 27 years ago. And Wolverine at the time only had about 20 years of print history to his name. So you could do a completely different set of cards based off of like the stories that have come since then.
Right. Yeah.
He particularly is an interesting character to talk about found family, because he's the quintessential loner character that he always, that's a trope for Wolverine, right? That he always just wants to be left alone.
Right.
But what always ends up happening to him as a member of the X-Men, he always ends up becoming someone's mentor.
Right. It's one of those things where when you see his when you look at his character, you can see why he wants to be left alone, is because when he like discovers like his past and things like that, and just the things he's done, like he's just guilt-ridden of the things that he's done that he hadn't remembered, or just feeling, that aggressiveness of how he can be a murderous person. And so I think he, in a sense, he pushes people away in order to protect them in a sense. Right. But you always see there's these stories where he definitely wants to have that connection with other people. He's always hesitant, or what's the word I'm looking for?
Reluctant?
Yes, thank you. That's exactly what I was looking for. Yeah.
Teacher win.
He's always, yeah. But yeah, he's always reluctant to be a mentor or to reach out and connect with other people because of that. But he kind of has to work through, some of those issues within himself. And that's another thing that's really interesting about his character is that, clearly that's his first response, but it doesn't always end like that because he's always, ends up being some sort of mentor or connects either in a friendship way or romantically and things like that.
That was the other thing that came to my mind. Like, if he cares about you, he's going to push you away because he wants to protect you. But if he falls in love with you, you're probably going to die.
That's about the way it goes.
Yeah. Just beware. Yeah. But just the way you said that, Kevin, except for the part about if he loves you, you'll die.
Yeah.
But the part about like if he loves you, then he'll push you away at first. That's what happens a lot of times in life with people who either get abandoned or people that have trust issues or things like that. They always put up walls at first and want somebody to break those walls down and try to connect with them, or for whatever reason they'll want to push you away either for your safety or for their own safety. But it's just a really good character to think about how again, talking about family of choice, how we can decide who we're going to have as part of our family because of the meaning that they have for us and the connection that you can have with them as well too. And that family has multiple meanings. So we talk about our nuclear family with the X-Men that we're just been talking about now, like how in schools or high schools or junior high, like a family outside your family, things like that. And the comics really reflect that really well, because I think just having this conversation right now, we see how this is a reflection of things that we see in our society, and just taking a different medium to express those things inside the world of these characters.
Yeah, I think coming from a big family, I always know that my family is going to be there for me, but at the same time, I don't have similar interests with many of them, and so like a lot of the I'll say it like this: through conversations about things that I'm interested in, I become invested in other people, and so I have found family at work. I have found family here online because I feel like after just about 6 months of us really doing this, so you guys are like brothers to me. But you're also the best avenue of conversation that I have for this particular topic.
Right.
Because if I were to start talking about this stuff with somebody in my actual family, they would be like, "Dude, what are you even talking about? I think I saw that movie, but yeah."
Right.
You just look at it. I think that we look at things through a different lens, and it's always helpful to find people with a similar lens to you.
Mm-hmm.
But speaking on Wolverine, one of the things that I found about him as I was like researching this topic, did you know that Wolverine, despite the fact that he wants to be a loner, is a character in Marvel Comics that's been a part of more teams than anybody else?
Yes. I think I've read that somewhere a while back. Yeah.
Yeah. So
that's actually a new one to me. I didn't realize that he's got that distinction.
Yeah. So I mean, every version of the X-Men, X-Force, X-Factor, the Avengers, the Dark Avengers, the Avengers West Coast, I'm not sure. He's been in a lot of teams, more so than anybody else. And it just kind of to me stands in juxtaposition to his inner self, right? Like that he doesn't really feel like he belongs anywhere, but he's always searching for, or maybe family finds him, much as the same way that it did in the film Logan, which is really, really kind of gets to the heart of who he is as a person.
Mm-hmm.
So one of the other topics that I wanted to bring up, and we can transition this straight from Wolverine because we just talked about Logan, and that film focused primarily on him, I guess, learning that he was a father, not through any of his own actions, but because he had a clone and finding his place and his legacy, I guess, and accepting his fate and being comfortable with dying. But there's a lot of examples of superheroes specifically who are either abandoned or they're orphaned at a young age. So they're always in search of a father, and then ultimately their storyline transitions to them becoming one. And I think two of the biggest example of that is Batman.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Over the course of years, he's been a surrogate father himself to the different Robins that have served alongside of him. But then here now in the most recent continuity in the last 10 years, he also has an actual son in Damian.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's a long-standing history of him, not only his motivation for becoming a superhero, losing a parent, but also finding a way in the world to become one himself.
I think it's 90% of the characters in comics have some sort of parent that's died or abandoned them,
Mm-hmm.
right? It's almost like the Disney effect, like how there's always a parent or both parents
Mm-hmm.
missing.
But I mean, if you think about Batman almost as being like Wolverine in a way, you know, he always wants to be left alone. He always wants to do things his way, but he keeps kind of attracting people to his family. Some of them are there because he wants them to be, and then there's always one or two that he doesn't exactly want them there, but they're there anyway.
Mm-hmm.
So it's just very odd when you kind of think of Batman as being like, you know, that kind of loner type when, you know, he really isn't. You know, he's got probably the biggest family in comics.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. Well, maybe that's a deeper metaphor that we all should see, because I think what I think is happening is that in the chaos of what's going on around them and these characters, that you have somebody like Dick Grayson, who himself has suffered this great tragedy, and he finds himself under the care of Bruce Wayne. Every successive Robin after that, they all have this thing in common, and is that with all the chaos in the world going around them, they recognize the safest place to be is with Batman.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's the same thing that you can say about the people who are attracted to Wolverine.
Mm-hmm.
Like, with everything that's going on around us, the safest place to be is standing right behind him. I think that is, you look at teams and families in general in comics, that I think that's kind of like the ultimate dynamic, that maybe at the basic human level, the necessity, the need that we're seeking to fulfill is our own personal safety. And we are, you know, there's safety in numbers.
Right. Yeah, because I mean, that's what seems to draw these characters to these people in the comics, is that there's a sense of safety and a sense of like consistency almost, or certainty rather, right? Like, you know that Batman or Wolverine or whatever figure is going to be reliable and is going to be there. Like, no matter how much they are the anti-hero or push people away, people know that they can depend on them even though they do these things, basically, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that's one of those other underlying themes that come through when we talk about family of choice. And it's interesting because, you know, we talk about how when the comics first came out, the nuclear family and the idea of family was you know, very specific and homogeneic.
Yes.
And now that when we look at our culture,
It's very different now.
It's very different, and you have all very different characters in comics that are working together or being a family with one another. Even when you look at, you know, in the movies with Fantastic Four, the most recent one, not the original one that came out, but you know how they have Michael B. Jordan and Kate Mara as brother and sister in there. I really like that because it's, again, more reflective and inclusive of the types of families that are out there. And it's not, you know, homogeneic anymore. You know, we've had this conversation how I'm an adopted parent, and so my son was adopted. We're not his birth parents at all whatsoever, but that doesn't change our love and our role as parents to him because of that. And that's starting to become more common the more I talk to people. And then I know, Kevin, you said that you have a stepdad.
Yeah, my stepdad, and I don't call him stepdad. He's been my dad for
right. Yeah.
29 years now. That he was born in Mexico and came to the United States at a young age. So not only did I grow up in a non-nuclear extended family, I also grew up in one with slightly different culture, like cultural norms, and experience things that I wouldn't have normally experienced had I just been in a married parents, white family. So yeah, there's definitely that, and I think now too, like if you look at our family photos, you can see that like, I guess, homogeneic consistency, it doesn't exist anymore, because we are all very, very different, and we're all different shades of pigmentation because of, I guess, my parents getting together, and who my siblings have married and whatnot. So it's not what it was when, let's say, Marvel was making it big in the early 1960s, the tail end of the golden years of the 50s, where every family was like, Leave It to Beaver.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. Well, I know even in my wife's side of the family, when you look at our family photo, it's me, Sarah, and Riley. Riley's adopted. Sarah's brother and his wife adopted a boy, and his birth parents are white and black. And then Sarah's oldest brother married into a family where his wife at the time had 2 little girls of her own, and one of her daughters had a daughter. And then Sarah's sister, she and her husband has 2 children, but they also had trouble like getting pregnant, had miscarriages and stuff like that. So when you look at our family photo, like, it's very different backgrounds. Like, there's some, a couple of kids that you can tell that, their skin color doesn't match with ours, and so that sticks out. But then there's, when you learn about the background story, it's just like everyone has their own different family experience that's not what we think about in the 1950s, like the Leave It to Beaver situation that you talked about. But I think it's really interesting that comics, even back in the 50s, had that idea about, this family of choice, and that it wasn't a common thing like how it is now, but
right.
They brought that out and gave people who may have been perceived themselves as being different because they didn't fit into that traditional idea of family as a safe space to dive into this world, to say it's okay if you're different. I mean, that's been the whole theme of X-Men, right? Is that
right.
Mutants is, takes on a lot of different identities throughout the comics in terms of, they're a symbol for, how racism is portrayed in our society today, or just people who are different and things like that. And so, just doing that very early on in the 50s, it's pretty impressive.
Yeah, they were pushing boundaries back then that people, I guess, they were still taboo then. People weren't talking about it. I mean, the X-Men themselves is an allegory for the civil rights movement. So, one of the best examples today, I think, and they've gone through several iterations in comics, but just specifically in the MCU, is the Guardians of the Galaxy, because they are the first family of the MCU now. They all come from a background of abandonment and then found each other, and none of them look physically like each other, right? They don't, one is a tree, one is a raccoon, one is a green guy covered in tattoos, one is a green lady of a different species altogether, and then one is a half earthling. But they all found something about themselves in the other members of that group. Like, that they had something to identify with, and I think that to me just speaks volumes. You don't have to look like somebody to be their family. I do tell my dad all the time, though, that I get my good looks from him, and as a joke. But and then like when I grew out a beard and mustache, when I started getting gray hair in my facial hair, I'd be like, "See, I told you, that's from your side of the family."
Right.
But it's not even a thought anymore for me.
Right.
It's become, and it's not difficult either. It's become, there's conversations that we have to have about why everybody looks different in our family to our 4-year-old, right? But I also feel like that's a good safe space and a way for her to grow up understanding the differences across, just her family, the differences in her family. I mean, my two children are the only white children left in our family, or in our family. I wouldn't say left, like that sounds bad, but the only two white children in our family, because my two half brothers are already half Hispanic. My sister married a Hispanic man. They have two children, and my brother, his wife, her family is from Mexico and Venezuela. And so, like, we all look a little bit different, or those children all look a little bit different. But, like, I ate dinner. We were celebrating my mom's birthday earlier today. I ate lunch with some of my siblings, and, like, you can't tell that those children don't love each other, despite the fact that they don't look anything like each other.
Right. Well, happy birthday to your mom.
Yeah.
Yeah, my mom, I won't tell you how old she is.
No, that's fine.
We don't need to know that.
No.
She probably wouldn't want us to know anyway.
Let alone broadcast it on our podcast.
To the thousands and thousands of people listening. Actually, she wouldn't mind, but because I'm fairly certain that she hasn't listened to this yet either. 'Cause, like I said, I'm the person in my family that this is interesting to, and it would be, out of other people's comfort zone to even have an interest level long enough to listen to this for 20 to 35 minutes. I have a list of people in the surrogate role and the mentor role, and this is going to bring up a touchy subject. I can feel it coming. But I wonder what it says about, like, all this grand history of finding your family, that there are fewer examples of motherhood in comics as opposed to, like, finding the male mentor. I can think of a few off the top of my head. One would be Aunt May to Spider-Man, and then the other one is Matt just said it over my back. He said Martha. Yeah, so Ma Kent has been the other one. What do you think? Like, do you think that that's from like the perspective of the people writing it, or do you think, like, what do you think about that?
More of my experiences with Aunt May and Ma Kent has been from either the movies or the TV shows, depending on what's what. But my kind of earliest kind of introduction to either two would have been Ma Kent and Lois and Clark, The New Adventures of Superman from the early 90s. I mean, she's the one that sewed together Superman's suit. This has to be on YouTube if you've not seen him, like, going through, like, outfit after outfit after outfit thing, but his mom's there trying to help him come up with that suit. And, that's kind of like, I always thought in that show in particular, they did a really good job with kind of, about it being Clark and about it being his family. And I think they just did a really good job in that show trying to get that across. And of course, that's been another 27 years there.
But is that okay? So, like, are either of you guys mama's boys?
I'm
No.
not. No.
Partial to your mom? I think there's just something about that in society, and maybe that is the gender role of old, and maybe things need to be shaken up about it, because you kind of see this as, okay, mom, what we expect from our mom is to be able to sew the suit and, love us unconditionally, drop pearls of wisdom every now and again. But then ultimately in comics, it's always portrayed as, like, there's a wise man, mentor, father figure that shows you the ways of the world. And that's not the case for a lot of people. You talk about the generation that we live in, like, single parent families are, at an all-time high. And there's just not examples. I can't think of a strong example. And if I can't, somebody that's listening to this right now, like, leave us a message and correct us. But there's just not a strong example of a female, like, leader or a female mentor figure.
Well, what about Wonder Woman's mom?
Hippolyta?
Yeah.
Did I pronounce it right?
I don't know.
But is she really even there?
Right.
Because Diana, she always wanted to go to man's world. She always wanted to kind of get away. And, mom didn't really want her to go. So
and then maybe what I'm talking about is like the difference between comics of the Silver Age versus what we have now. Because like what I said earlier about there not being a strong female role model, that's not true, because there definitely are.
Right.
But these are characters who have evolved into strong female role models themselves and did not necessarily have that from the like conception of their characters. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think you're focusing on more of a female representation as the mentor parental role.
Yeah.
And yeah, I mean, I agree. There are not as many female mentors that's portrayed in the comics as there are male. And I think you're right, Kevin. I think that's a good point. That's probably something that comics need to start addressing, is how can we integrate female characters a little bit more as those mentors. And I think they've done that in some ways. Like Captain Marvel is a mentor
I was
figure
say
to
the same thing.
Miss Marvel and others as well, right? But she never really portrays that like parental role necessarily as much as more of a mentor. And I think, when we look at those parental figures that's taken on that role, that's not their birth parent, but is in their lives like that. So like Alfred for Bruce Wayne and all that. I think that is lacking. And I mean, I don't know what the answer is for that, for them to start integrating that, but
some of that has got to be generational.
It is.
Yeah. It's just that we're talking about a different time period than when a lot of these characters were created. And
it's hard to rewrite those back histories too, right? It's like, the second you switch things around where, it's now the female instead of the male, when it's been like this for so long. Like
look at the backlash that Captain Marvel in the movie being a female and not male. Yeah, that wasn't a popular opinion, but it is. Here's the thing: is that you've got comic books like Captain Marvel is a great one, where she's a leader in the Avengers. She's been, going back 10, 15 years to when, one of my favorites is the Mighty Avengers, and she was the co-captain of that team with Tony Stark. So she's a military leader. There's a lot of leadership about her, but she's always portrayed as the leader of a unit, of a team, and not necessarily. And maybe I need to read more about it, but it's a different dynamic. And then the other thing is I think we need to, I think it's great that you have things like the A-Force, which are is an all-female team, and you have some great heroes that have been heroes for a while that mentor the younger ones, but it's all female to male. And I think that there needs to be a situation where young men see the value in mentorship by older women in a position of authority.
The only example I can think is T'Challa and Black Panther, right?
Okay.
But that's, again, I didn't grow up reading Black Panther. That's just the movie role that I've seen. But I mean, his mother obviously has that, strong role in his life, and his sister, and the fact that they have all female warrior army protecting the kingdom, stuff like that. But again, they're very limited, and there's just not enough of that out there to reflect what's going on in society today. That's not something that's a new phenomenon. Like, this has been something that has occurred a long time. It seems like this is one of the things that comics has been behind on, is showing how female women mothers are the single parent, where they're playing both of those roles for their daughters and their sons, and that's not being reflected well enough in the comics right now, I think, to show that women can take on that role and be that influence for that person, that they can, yes, sew the suits for the superhero, but also give them that strong protective role and protect their kids and give them that, wise age-old wisdom that about the world that they can take on and internalize and make that as part of their own character and things like that. And we're just missing that in comics right now.
Yeah, I mean, in corporate America, and even for me, in education, I know two specifically very strong female principals. One is the principal of the high school that my junior high feeds in, and then one is the high school of the intermediate that feeds into my junior high that my son goes to. They have very, very strong female principals, and I think that as a society, we're catching up to the embracing the idea of women in a leadership capacity. But I think the other thing that we need to find, and comics could go a long way to help us reflect that, is putting a value on the traditional like mother mentor role.
Right.
You know what I mean? Specifically, like a stay-at-home mom is as much an important part of our society as the lady who is the CEO of some Fortune 500 company.
Right. Yeah, agreed. James, you haven't said much yet. I feel like Kevin and I are dominating the conversation. I'm sorry.
Well, no. Because this one is one that I'm kind of learning more about the two of you all, too, with the way your families are. You know, me and my family, we've never really been particularly close. I lost my dad back in 2015. And, you know, that was what it was. But I've lived between 3 and 6 hours away from my family for the last 15 years now.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, we see each other, we get together at holidays and stuff. But, you know, that really strong family dynamic's just never really been there.
Mm-hmm.
So I've had a chance to kind of learn from you two a lot tonight, and to also kind of see how comics have kind of helped you all kind of, it's almost like, you know, the two of you have kind of modeled your families after comics in a way. And that's, and that's just really cool.
I definitely think it does play a role in your willingness or your openness to accept people for who they are.
Mm-hmm.
That's definitely a big theme in our family. But 15 years ago, no, it's not that long, but fairly close. My wife was going to one of her very first job interviews, and I drove her to the job interview, and then I kind of like sat in the car, and it was in a really rural part of town where there weren't a lot of like radio stations to choose from, and I found a talk radio show, and it was I don't know her last name, Dr. Laura. Are you guys familiar with Dr. Laura?
Yeah.
Sounds familiar.
Anyway, she was counseling somebody who called in about having to choose where they go for a holiday, and her family was not very welcoming. It was always drama, and her husband's family was the exact opposite. She just felt like it was a better dynamic, but her family always held it against her that when she said, you know, that we were going to go and stay with or we were going to go and visit the husband's family. And there's something that has stuck with me ever since then. And even when like I was dealing with issues with my biological father, who I no longer have any relationship whatsoever with, was that you have to invest time and energy and love into the people who are going to do the same for you. You know, I come from a very Christian background, and, you know, you're supposed to love everybody. And I, in my heart of hearts, hopefully somewhere I truly do. But at the same time, like I want to spend time with people who are gonna fill my cup as the same way that I can help to fill theirs. Otherwise, you empty yourself out into other people, and you don't ever get anything back.
Right.
Exactly.
Right.
And that's kind of the way it is with mine. Like, I think I'm closer to my in-laws, my wife's family, than what I am to mine.
Mm-hmm.
They come up here and see us, you know, a few times a year. We go back there and we see them. So I see them, you know, a lot more, and we spend a lot of time together that way. But like, I went and saw my mom in August, about the time that school started. First time I'd seen her since, I think, Christmas.
Mm-hmm.
We stayed for about 2 days and we left. I mean, that's just kind of the way it is. Like,
right.
We just don't. It's like, you know, we're family, like, by blood, but, you know.
Right.
You know, if things ever went south and I had to find a new place to live or anything like that, it definitely wouldn't be, that's not the direction I would turn to.
Right.
The couch is not available to you, James. Is that what you're saying?
Exactly.
You know, what's a shame too, though, is we live in the golden age of communication. So it doesn't take much to get face to face with somebody in 2019 and be able to have a conversation. I mean, I'm lucky. My parents literally live across the freeway from us, and it's a 5-minute trip over there, and we see them every day because they pick my daughter up from school. But on the flip side of that is I have a brother that lives in Brussels, Belgium, and I try, and we both live busy lives, but like I can see my brother an ocean and a continent away. And so, like I said, when people are willing to invest in you and that relationship, then you're willing to do the same thing.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. You know that the person besides my wife who asks me how I'm doing and literally means it more than anybody else is Sean.
Oh, that's nice.
I'm serious. Like, you know, when you talk to people at work and they say, "How you doing today?" That is one, rhetorical, and two, they're really hoping that you don't really start telling them how you really are because they're just trying to be polite. Mm-hmm. But like when we need to talk about something about the podcast or when there's something cool that we want to share, it's always either followed up or it's prefaced with an actual, "Hey, how are you doing? I'm checking in with you guys." And like, to me, that is the definition of finding your family. That is that you care, you're investing as much into the relationship as I am.
Mm-hmm.
Well said.
I gotta say, I agree completely. I think it's amazing how we have not met in person at all, but I feel like, I'm sure you two feel this way as well too. I feel like I'm just as close to you guys as I am with my in-person friends here in Indianapolis, you know?
Yeah.
And it's just great that, you know, with the technology able to bring us together like that. And I just absolutely love this relationship that we have. I think it's great how I can reach out to you guys and I feel like I know you guys on a personal level and we've never met in person. Like, that's just crazy, right? I think that's just great. Oh, shoot. You know, I got to say, one thing for me, at least, is growing up, I loved Superman as a character, right? I never really read the Superman comics, but I loved him as a character. But when I became an adoptive father, watching Man of Steel really just changed how important Superman became in my life. Because, you know, growing up, yeah, I knew that, you know, the Kents adopted him because he was from a different planet and stuff like that. But like, as someone who lived that traditional nuclear family where all my, you know, brothers and sisters were from the same parents and we were like the definition of the traditional nuclear family. So I never thought of, you know, what that life was like. But now becoming an adoptive parent because my wife and I couldn't have children of our own through traditional means and all that. Watching that movie and watching, you know, Kevin Costner play that role of the adoptive parent just takes on a new meaning of what Superman and Jonathan Kent means for me. And that I want to make sure I share that experience with my son. So if he ever feels like he's different because he's adopted, I want to point him to Superman and say, you know, you're not alone in this, you know, and look at this great person that was also adopted. And so it's really interesting, like the older you get, just how your different experiences takes on different meanings with the comics that you read as a kid or the characters that you grew up with. So I didn't mean to sidetrack that too much, but I had that on my mind.
No, that's perfect. I know that I've said this before, the relationship that Peter Quill has with Yondu in the Guardians of the Galaxy movies, and the line that gets me every time, that he might have been your father, but he ain't your daddy. I think that we all have something like that we find a piece of ourselves in.
Right. Yeah.
Hey, that wraps up another episode of The Captioned Life. We really hope that you enjoyed this episode. We did. We enjoyed recording it. Don't forget to subscribe to this podcast on whatever platform you listen to and follow us on social media at Captioned Life.
That sounds great.
Peace out.